Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of the brutal, aggressive, and quite nasty behaviour among the judiciaries, the judges and the magistrates, to openly and aggressively discriminate against white people, and particularly straight white men. Now, this is happening sort of all over the legal landscape, and I've commented on a number of times before, but there's a few cases of which are playing out all across the Western world, where white people are going to court to say, well, look, I'm being discriminated against. It's open, it's aggressive, it's super anti-white, and it's against the law, which it is. Now, even though those laws against discrimination exist, for example, racism, that sort of thing, exist, the judiciary all across the Western world, not in every jurisdiction, but certainly the majority of them, and these are specialist courts that are set up to hear things like divorce or things like anything where there's race, gender, sexual proclivity type conflict. There are special courts now pretty much that hear those the judges in those courts and the operatives and the people all around it are absolutely dedicated to the idea of social power means you must have less legal power because you have more social power, therefore you must have less legal power. But also mixed into that or baked into that is the idea of restorative justice. Gay people have been discriminated, lesbians have been discriminated against for centuries. So we have to restore justice. We have to take from the Nazis and give to the victim. That type of attitude. And there's certainly across all of these restorative justice areas and social power areas, there's a heavy overrepresentation of Jewish activists. And they simply impose the paradigm of Jews have been victims for centuries, and these other people have been victims against. Therefore, we're all victims together. Therefore, compensation, restorative justice, and striking back against the oppressor, fighting back against Hitler, is very much their worldview, and they can't disentangle that. In my view, from my perception at least, that twisted worldview from any practical reality that's in front of them on any given case or court case or any piece of evidence. Nonetheless, let's have a look at this. Now, there's one case that's, I think it's heading for the Supreme Court in the United States, which is a straight woman who worked, I think, in a government department or a quanga, is saying that significantly less qualified lesbians and so on were, or I think a gay guy in one instance, were appointed above her and given promotions and other benefits, invited to, and there's a few cases I'm looking at here. Another one, the LGBTQ people were taken to lavish conferences on first class flights and lots of caviar and Napoleon brandy and so on, and whereas the straight person wasn't invited along. In fact, they were disincluded, and so very, very open and blatant discrimination against white people on the basis of A, race, or B, that they were straight and white. So now, when these people take the cases to court, the courts that hear them generally accept. So they say, well, yes, okay, discrimination took place. That's all right, because the law says you can't discriminate. So discrimination took place, but we're going to impose a moral law, not that's codified, it doesn't exist anywhere, but we'll just impose it nonetheless. A moral law that because you're straight and white, you have social power. Therefore, your claims of discrimination have less validity and possibly no validity whatsoever. I mean, if you're a black lesbian, that would be different because of the social power implications. Now, this doesn't exist anywhere in law. there's a few things you could probably dredge up as precedent, but again, they only exist because they haven't been challenged, because it's illegal anyway. So they're imposing a moral law, and they're saying this moral law sits above the actual codified law, the codified law voted on and passed by the elected representatives of the people. That doesn't matter. We can impose a moral law that sits above that, and that not only negates but vanquishes the actual law that's codified on the statute books. Now that's insanity. That means the judges can do whatever the fuck they want, and they can just impose this arbitrary moral law that doesn't exist. It exists only in the fevered imaginations of the activists. Yet enough activist judges have been appointed, and they think they have the right to ignore codified law and impose moral law. So this woman, I think it's in the United States. Again, I've got a few cases I'm looking at here, but this woman complains that she's being discriminated against. You know, there are less qualified people being promoted over her. She's been many years in this department or organisation. Much less qualified people have been promoted over her. She complains about it. Then, in order to get back at her, they demote her and engage in petty campaigns of petty harassment and whispering and so on. So she takes it to court, and the first court says, "No, look, okay, you were discriminated against, right? You satisfy the legal standard, but you're a straight white person, so we're going to impose a moral law on top of that, because if we allow you to have your rights under law, under codified law, based on the facts, which we accept you've been discriminated against, say the judge or the judges, but even though you've been discriminated against, you have social power. We say you have, so we can just morally, arbitrarily assert you have social power. Therefore, you have no legal rights. That is, we will not decide in your favour, even though we accept that legally you meet the standard. So now, bear in mind this particular woman is being financed. She doesn't have the resources to run all these court cases. So no, but this is not like if it was the reverse. If it was the black lesbian being discriminated against, then they would have the endless resources of the state, taxpayer resources of the state to use, where they could have an endless run of lawyers and activists and so on and so forth. A whole cavalcade of activists would be running around righteously demanding justice and so on. But this is a straight white person, so there's no one there. Well, actually, in this case, there is someone funding the legal thing, but the state isn't rushing to her assistance or throwing lawyers at her, left, government-funded lawyers at her. Although none of that. She has to find private funding to go about this. I don't know whether that's in the US. I don't know about Stephen Miller's group that he was associated with before getting back into the White House. But so she appeals it, and the appeal court, also a bunch of activists, arrived pretty much at the same conclusion. Well, yeah, all right, then legally you do meet the standard, you were discriminated against, but you're a straight white chick, you have social power. If we give you what you're entitled to, which is the promotion and that sort of thing, that means we have to take it away from someone, a black woman who's was it a black woman? I think it was a black woman who's a lesbian. So we have her with so little social power, we arbitrarily sort of ideologically determine. So we have to take something. So we're not going to side in your favour, because to decide in your favour, which again you meet the legal standard, we have to take something away from an oppressed minority who has less social power. Therefore, we're contributing to, by deciding in your favour, we're contributing to the problem of unequal social power and unequal outcomes. But that's not codified anywhere in the law. Again, we see judges just going arbitrarily saying, well, the law doesn't really matter here. We can again impose on top of that an arbitrary moral law which trumps or emasculates actual law. Now, you'd think elected politicians and legal scholars would be up in arms about this, saying, well, hey, hold on, that's why we have fucking codified law. So the judges, follow the law. We all follow the law. We're all obligated to follow the law. But if you can just invent moral law, don't just do it on the fly, off the seat of your pants, pull it out of your ass, then what laws do we actually have? We don't have laws. We have some bullshit arbitrary ideological free-for-all, which is really what most of the law is degenerated into. This is only where the globalists have taken control. That they've imposed this and undermined and subverted the real law in the same way they've subverted democracy. So, as in free and fair elections. So the higher you move up the legal food chain, the less likely it is you're going to encounter majority activist judges. The globalists just haven't taken control of the Supreme Court and the high courts yet in all across the world. So imagine if Trump hadn't won the election in 2016 and Hillary had got in, and Hillary would have appointed 3, Sotomayors or Ketanji Brown Jacksons into the Supreme Court. Then you'd have, you almost have an 8-1 or 7-2 majority activist, low IQ activist judges in the Supreme Court, and Trump wouldn't be having any of the wins. Trump wouldn't win a thing through the Supreme Court. So just imagine if that had happened. The Supreme Court would have been stacked. Pretty much most of the appellate courts and district courts are all stacked with activists. It would have been the end of the Western world, I believe. Now, this is not just in the US. This is happening all over the place. But this case of the woman, which shows that the resources being put behind her, she's taken, as I understand, it's either about to go or is already on its way to the Supreme Court in the United States. And my understanding, at least, of the case is can a court say, look, we don't give a stuff about the law. We can just impose our sort of moral compass onto it all, and our ideological moral compass, and just say that our moral position again trumps the law. I would imagine, certainly by my reading of it at least, the Supreme Court will say, no, you can't do that. The law apply. This is the law to do with discrimination and so on, whether it be racism or discrimination against people on the basis of sexuality. This woman, I think, primarily is arguing that just because she's not LGBTQ, she was discriminated against. That's my understanding of it. You can view this discrimination, by the way, in a couple of, was she actually discriminated? So was she, taken out back and shot or something, or what was? It wasn't a direct form of discrimination, as in she was simply fired, or they said, well, you're straight, then you're white, we're going to have your salary. It wasn't that. It was denial of opportunity on the basis of that. So she was being denied promotions to a more senior level of, manager, and with that more senior level would have come more benefits, such as higher income and more bigger expense account, things like that. So she's saying, well, I was denied that. Now, when she complained about it, then she was discriminated against by demoting her and treating her like shit and so on. So in retaliation for how dare you defy our ideology. So we need to sort of be clear on the different sort of slightly different slants on that discrimination. But being brutally treated or being denied opportunity are two different strands of that. So my sort of reading. Now, if we look all across the Western world, cases just like this are playing out everywhere. There's no shortage of them. I mean, you can any direction you want to look in, there's plenty of them. Now, the first time I saw it in operation, this was the burden of proof. I mean, just coming back to the case of the LGBTQ, the woman complaining she was, or bringing lawsuits that she was discriminated against. The argument is, again, that the person with the most social power must meet a much higher burden of proof. Not tiny bit higher, bubby bit higher, but itty bitty higher, but a lot higher. Whereas the person, the black lesbian that says she was discriminated against, only has to meet a much lower burden of proof. I mean, you've got the problem there straight away. The argument is that if you have the less social power you have, the less evidence you need to bring into court. The more social power, again, all ideologically determined. This is not a codified law or anything. The more social power you have, then the more evidence you need. Now, I saw that probably the starkest example of that was I was in the divorce courts, having a look at how they operated once, and the reason being that I was then VP of new product development of this company, and I was losing a lot of top flight engineers and programmers to the divorce thing. They would come to me and say, "Look, they're hitting me up for so much alimony and so on that it's just not worth my while working. I might as well just go and sweep the floor somewhere for a cash payment or something." So these top of the town design engineers were just deciding to quit work and and go off and become window cleaners or something like that, because they were being hit up for so much it just wasn't worth their while. And I thought, that's insane. Why would any economy or country or body politic or legal system do that to its own citizens? I actually didn't believe it. So anyway, I went to the divorce courts to have a look. So I went into a few cases and sat in there, was staggered at how they were operating. They were ideological fanatics, and yet nobody was there was no check or balance to stop them. For those who had massive financial resources, they could go to the Supreme Court, but I mean, only a tiny fraction of people have those sort of resources, and they if they've got that sort of money, then they've got enough to pay off a greedy ex-wife or something. So I was in one case where it went like this: the ex-wife's made a allegation, he abused me or something like that, or he abused the children, or both. And so the lawyer for the guy says, "Okay, well, when did these abuses take place?" I don't know. The woman's been cross-examined. I don't know. Well, where did they take place? I can't remember. Well, what were these abuses? I don't know. So, now, any judge worth a pinch of shit would just dismiss the allegation of abuse. But so I was looking at this, and I fully expected the judge to say that and say, "By the way, you're an unreliable witness, and you perjury," even to the point of saying that she'd committed perjury. But instead, the judge just turns to the man and says, "Okay, your ex-wife said you're an abuser. As far as the court is concerned, there's no evidence, remember, not a shred, not the slightest shred, not even a scintilla of evidence to support." But the judge says the following. I'm paraphrasing, but this is how I remember it. Okay, your ex-wife has said you're an abuser and so on. As far as the court is concerned, that is fact. Fact, says the judge. Not a scintilla of evidence, but the judge says that is fact. And to prove that you are not an abuser, says to the guy, you have to prove that you were not in the country. You were not even in the country during this time. Now, remember, the woman hasn't said when these abuses occurred. So the judge just does a blanket thing of, okay, you have to prove you're not in the country for 10 years. 10 years you've got to prove you are not in the country. Now, can you imagine a greater miscarriage of justice? But that's it. The guy's not a rich man. He can't afford to go through the appeal process. He's fucked. Absolutely fucked. But this is sort of writ large and put into just a couple of minutes of a legal case. That's the sort of attitude that these activist judges have, and that's how they perceive where the burden of proof lies. The higher your imagined ideological social power, the greater the evidence. Now, the guy has to prove he wasn't in the country for a whole 10 years. That is the burden. So the burden of proof he has to meet is in the stratosphere. I mean, it's even into another solar system. It's so high. Whereas the burden of proof she needs to meet is zero, nothing, not even a shred of evidence. Just a vague allegation. I don't know. I can't remember. But the judge clearly knows that's not evidence. The judge knows that. The judge knows that he is a Jewish judge, by the way. The judge knows he is corrupting the whole legal process by doing this. But it's not an issue of the law or fact or evidence. It's an issue of social power and restorative justice. And there are just too many judges that see it that way. And there has to be a mechanism to hold them to account. And it has to be a mechanism that holds them to account for what they've done, not an appeal process that is only available to the rich. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.